Welcome to another segment of Beyond the Grassy Knoll. And with us is an old friend who's going to also chime in on the subject of the Civil War. He is our fourth guest, not necessarily in that order. We still don't know how many I'm going to compile before we put this out sometime in February. But it's Charles T. Wilcox. He is the author of Transformation of the Republic. Anybody who's listened to this show throughout the years is well aware that he's been here many times. And we're going to talk about the Civil War, but we're going to talk about the aftermath, which we might not have done that much with all the other guests. So anyway, from the Great White North, in the fine city of Calgary, in the wonderful province of Alberta, in the all-star country known as Canada. Hello, Charles.
Yeah, hello.
Oh, yeah. No, I didn't get a chance to see the junior playoffs.
Well, it was a good. There was one goal there. I couldn't believe this. I can't remember who the heck did it, right? But he, I mean,
he picked it up on a stick, right?
I mean, they're rushing the net. Like, this is the Canadian team, right? They're rushing the net, and the puck kind of goes up into the air to the left of the goaltender, right? And so he kind of bounces this thing on his stick, you know, like
paddle ball or something.
Yeah, like Tiger Woods would with a golf ball or whatever, and just whacks it into the net. And I go, what the? It's the strangest goal you know, obviously it counted in that, but it's the strangest.
It was artistic, yeah.
That was pretty cool, man.
And this was a fine Canadian lad that did that, right?
Yeah. So I can't remember he was one of the. I mean, he's going to be way up there in the draft.
The draft picks. Okay.
Yeah.
And the reason we do this, folks, is traditional for Charles and me to open up a little Canadian lore, and usually it's got to do with either the weather or hockey. So at any rate, but you know, Canada does figure in the Civil War, and a lot of people don't. Well, of course, if you stick to our U.S. history books, you don't really see a whole lot about it. What a big surprise. And not that we're going to focus on that, but there is one thing I wanted to ask you before we get into some of the template questions I've asked the others so we can do a comparison, and also what you want to do, and that is take it past those Civil War years. But I wanted to ask you something because I didn't get a chance necessarily to talk about it with Ralph or Al or Eric, but I did mention, I do believe, that Jefferson Davis was a regular visitor to Canada. Is that correct?
Yeah, he had a
cottage or something.
He had a cottage right on the shores of Lake Erie.
All right, now, would that put him in Ontario?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, just southeast of Hamilton.
All right, how far would you say from the most southwestern part of Quebec province?
Quebec.
What would you think? I mean, a couple hundred miles?
Hundreds of miles.
Okay. All right. No, I mean, only because, and I think you would agree, that the province of Quebec was probably the most anti-U.S., not because necessarily of the French-Canadian influence, but because the Jesuit influence was very strong. In fact, the strongest in Quebec than any other province. Would that be right?
Anti-blue states.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, they were. You got to remember, Canada is a confederation of provinces that are sort of semi-autonomous, right? And that was kind of the general direction that the southern states wanted to kind of copy. Okay?
Right.
And so for that reason, the whole idea of a confederacy was closer to the hearts of people in Quebec and a lot of people in southern Ontario than an idea of what the North kind of had in mind. Right?
Yeah.
You see what I mean?
Yes.
So there was an affinity there to the point where the Davis government felt quite comfortable in establishing a kitchen cabinet in Montreal. So you had a lot of southern people based out of Montreal, like, you know, A lot of politicians were there. A lot of diplomats were there. And there was a lot of spy-type activity going back and forth across the border, right? But Davis's kitchen cabinet was based in Montreal. I mean, what can you say, right?
From the research you've done, and I've been removed from this for a while, but Davis and Judah Benjamin both lit out right after the Confederacy crumbled. I know Judah Benjamin got over to England without a scratch. Didn't Davis get apprehended and yet kind of got off easy?
As far as I know, yeah, they caught him dressed up as a woman.
There you go.
And it was sort of like the first don't ask, don't tell.
But the reason I say that is because are you in the school that would believe largely that Davis was also a tool of the Europeans?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, if he's appealing to the Pope, you know, directly for help, and
wait a minute, are you saying attractive? No.
Yeah.
All right, he's appealing to the Pope. I mean, he went to him for what?
Help politically, financially, diplomatically, all that stuff, right? He asked the Pope for his direct help, and the Pope, Pius IX, said, "Sure, we'll do all we can in order to, promote you." And I mean, the Pope even went so far as to write a letter for wide publication, acknowledging the legitimacy of the Confederacy, and he acknowledged the fact that there were two competing nations.
Right.
Right. So yeah.
Supposedly, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
No.
So and he was also looking for help from the European monarchs, to the point where he even offered a crown to the Habsburgs, right? Says, like if you help me out, then I will give, Napoleon's second cousin or whatever he is, an actual crown, and the crown would be, blessed and sanctioned by the Pope and all that stuff. So he would be like a monarch in the Confederacy. And what they wanted to do is basically reestablish monarchy on the North American continent.
Yeah, and that would, who knows if that was what that was really all about. But wouldn't that have been rich if the nation stayed divided? That the Confederacy, supposedly the champion of state rights, would have gone even more monarchical than the federalized North. I mean, what an irony that would have been.
Yeah.
All right, and one other thing, and this has been a long time since we talked about this, but it just came to mind, and that is, didn't you have ancestors that got involved in the Civil War?
No.
Okay.
I had ancestors they were all living in New England, like the Connecticut area.
Okay.
Right? So, like, if you go to Connecticut, Wilcox is apparently, still a pretty big name there. Right? And then they kind of scattered all over the lower 48. But half the family apparently decided to stay in the States and establish the country there. And the other half were loyalists to the crown, and they hightailed it. They built a raft, basically. I think they took off from somewhere in Pennsylvania and sailed across the Lake Erie.
Erie, right? Okay.
Yeah, and landed in Simcoe, and then homesteaded there, either just prior to the War of Independence or during it.
Okay, so they scooted out to Ontario and sat it out there.
Yeah.
Did they ever come back? Did that branch ever come back to the U.S., do you know?
Well, aspects of it, yeah. My aunt and my uncle.
Okay.
Right, they went back down right after World War II.
Are they the ones that are down here in Florida?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Okay, so thanks for that. It's been a while, and I know I hadn't asked you about that, but I remember that from, I guess, perhaps when we, first had communication.
Mm-hmm. There's other branches of the family that went back down to the States as well. I met them when I was a kid. Some were living in Grosse Pointe Farms outside of Detroit, which is apparently a very wealthy section.
Oh, yeah.
Right? But when I went to visit, and I just wanted to go outside, to go to the corner store or whatever, and they absolutely had a fit. Right? They thought that I was going to get mugged or something. And it didn't even dawn on me.
Not in Grosse Pointe. No, I don't think so.
Yeah.
No. That is a real Tony place. There's no two ways about it. Before we go into what might be considered your bailiwick with regard to what we've talked to the other guests about, I have to start by asking you this, just as a baseline, and that is, who were the perpetrators in the Civil War? And if you just want to save some time, not those necessarily in the U.S., but are we led to believe that there were those outside the U.S.? That's one. And two, having stated that, what was the benefit for their involvement?
The perpetrators?
To instigate the Civil War in the United States.
Well, let's see now. I can give you a quote from Otto von Bismarck.
Okay.
Of Germany, and this comes from my second edition, page 444. Otto von Bismarck said, "The division of the United States into federations of equal force was decided long before the Civil War by the high financial powers of Europe, that being the Rothschilds. And the Rothschilds, I don't know if people realize this, they have an actual title, which is Guardian of the Vatican Treasury."
All right, so hold it right there, Charles. Now, hang on to your thought, because this gets deliberately misconstrued. Would you just restate the title?
Guardians of the Vatican Treasury.
All right. What I hear is, well, they're the Vatican bankers, and that's that they give the money to the Vatican. That's not the case. The case is the Vatican charges them with hanging on to the considerable largesse, and when they want it, they ask for it. It isn't like the Rothschilds are financing the Vatican.
Okay. I'm not too sure how that situation works, but I know that the Rothschilds are heavily involved in Vatican finances.
Right.
Whether or not the Vatican hangs on to them as a retainer kind of thing, like you would a lawyer, or whether the Rothschilds actually loan money to the Vatican and finance them directly. I'm not too sure exactly how that worked. All I know is that there was a very, very close tie between the two, to the point where they've got like an official title.
Yeah. Oh no, I mean, my understanding, and I think this goes back quite a way, and I think Burke McCarty might even had said that, a century or two ago, and she was writing this in the 20s, the Rothschilds did stake the Vatican to a loan, but as far as who holds the big money, that's quite reversed than it was in the old days, and that comes from her, and I think she's a pretty reliable source, and I think that also got exposed, Charles, to a certain degree, with that Vatican banking scandal, the connections between Rome and the city of London, to include the death of the Vatican banker, Calvi, who hung himself, right?
Yeah, full of bricks.
Yeah, and the death of John Paul I.
Yeah. And the death of John Paul I was portrayed pretty close to reality in The Godfather Part 3.
You got it. And in fact, watch that, because there's there's quite a few winks that take place in that movie if you're paying attention, which I did not do when I saw that in the movies. But I did buy that and watched it knowing what I know now, like you know. And, there's plenty of connectivity that is, I wouldn't even say hinted at, almost boldly stated. And
very boldly.
There you go. That's right. All right.
So all they did was change the names.
Right.
But Calvi is depicted in that movie as a filthy little rat hole banker.
Well, they all are.
Yeah.
But wasn't it bold for them to show that particular pope was poisoned?
Yeah.
I mean, it wasn't even like, the poor guy had a cold, congestive heart failure. He was poisoned, and they showed that in the movie Godfather 3.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So I took you off course there a little bit. If we can return to where we were going.
Sure. Okay. So he goes on to state, these bankers were afraid that the United States, if they remained in one bloc and as one nation, would attain economic and financial independence, which would in turn upset their financial dominion over Europe and the world. Of course, in the inner circle of finance, the voice of the Rothschilds prevailed. They saw an opportunity for prodigious booty if they could substitute two feeble democracies burdened by debt to the bankers in place of a vigorous republic sufficient unto herself. Therefore, they sent their emissaries into the field to exploit the question of slavery and to drive a wedge between the two parts of the Union. The rupture between the North and South became inevitable. The masters of European finance employed all of their forces to bring it about and to turn it to their advantage. And that's a quote by German Chancellor Otto von Bismarck.
That you've incorporated in your book, right?
That's right.
All right, before we go any further, let's just do this. Again, the book's name is Transformation of the Republic. Charles, just tell people if they want to take a look in it, I mean, you've given them, I think, some ample samples on your website. Give us the website. Tell folks how they can take a look at it, and if they're so inclined, to purchase it.
Okay, the website is ctwilcox.com, and I have a number of things there that I've posted for free. But if they want the any of the editions, the second one is the most
most recent. Okay.
Yeah, and I've got that available in hardcover for right now. I've got it on sale, $56.95 for the second edition hardcover, $44 for the second edition paperback, and just under $35 for the original paperback. If they want a signed copy, they can write to me at cwilcox@telus.net, telus.net, or they can write me at P.O. Box 119, 2825, 17th Avenue Southeast, Calgary, Alberta, and the postal code is T2A0P7.
All right, now that mailing address is also on your site, is that correct?
It is, yeah.
Okay. All right.
And all the links are there. And if they want to buy it online, they can go to. I have a link there.
Okay.
To lulu.com,
all right.
Which is the printer and distributor, and you can get it that way as well.
All right. Thank you. And now we'll pick up the story.
Okay. So so obviously you see the the highfalutin bankers doing all they can, and the bankers in turn are acting on in concert with the Jesuits. Right? So they had their people running around trying to exploit the whole slavery question and making money on both ends, and trying to split the country apart and establish two competing entities that they could have fun with.
Well, I mean, I don't necessarily believe now that the end game was to bring back the United States as two different countries, but I think what the monarchies, the old world, and Rome did was, one, teach the U.S. a lesson, and two, also see that when it came back together again through Lincoln, after Lincoln and such, that it would come back with a much more expansive central government, a bit more monarchical in form, and more easily dealt with by those in Europe. Would that be somewhat of a correct assessment?
Yeah, and using money as the grease.
Sure. Oh, absolutely.
They would pay off the politicians to promote the European agenda.
Well, it's interesting because Patrick Henry, after the Constitution was hoodooed over the American people, said, I used to be a Virginian. After this thing, I'm a citizen of the United States. Now, that's interesting because he actually stated the affairs at the time when he realized that the 13 states were going to be federated under the Constitution, but also it was a bit of a harbinger of what would take place with the 14th Amendment United States.
Mm-hmm.
And again, you're an American citizen, and your state residency is secondary and kind of like ancillary to the whole thing. So here you go. I mean, you had, I hate to say it, because people don't like to hear it, but really, the fix was in right after the Constitution, but it was somewhat almost 80 years later. It was exacerbated by the Civil War and the 14th Amendment. And I think we're looking at a situation, and it happened again, Charles, under FDR with the New Deal and that socialization, and we're seeing it happen in the United States again.
Mm-hmm.
It'll happen. It's not Obama's fault. He's just another idiot that they put in the White House. But we're going to see probably the end of us, I would think.
Yeah.
So
well, look who Obama surrounded himself with. A bunch of Clinton retreads. That a lot of them. Yeah, I mean, really, a lot of them are CFR and trilateral guys and Bilderberg guys, and their whole purpose has been to, destroy the hegemony of the United States.
Sure.
And eventually, I suppose, turn their national autonomy over to another entity, whether
Yes.
it's the UN or whatever, right?
It always goes down better under a Democratic president. A Democrat president, I should say Democratic, because that's not an adjective. We're looking at a proper noun, Democrat.
Seems to.
Huh?
It seems to. Yeah, they've used the Democrats for all their dirty work.
Well, yeah. What you do is you create hardships underneath a Republican regime, and that would be, say, like Hoover to the Democrat FDR, and now we're looking at a situation. Well, let's see, Hoover to FDR, and then we're looking at Bush to Obama. But what's interesting too is that the last two Democrat presidents, very responsible for a lot of the selling out of the United States. Not that it was their idea, but they're the pretty face that they put on the agenda.
Carter and Clinton?
Yeah, both CFR.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
And Carter was a trilat and a charter member who was immediately taken under the wing of David Rockefeller and Ziggy Brzezinski.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, it's just
the
so
same
rich.
two guys that right now are dictating, telling Obama what the hell to do.
Yeah. No, it's perfect. Like you said, I mean, not even retreads necessarily. I mean, it's the same old characters. People think they vote for a president. They really don't. But they think they vote for a president. But, with that, you get egg roll. And that means all the unelected officials that compile it in after you supposedly elect the president, which I would say are the heaviest duty power brokers that you have. I mean, Kissinger never goes away. Brzezinski never goes away. Right? And I mean, and all the cats that you put into the cabinet, like you said, they're all coming back out of the woods. It's beautiful. So anyway, I mean, I don't get all worked up about whether it's Obama. I mean, they're all put there.
No, yeah, of course. I mean,
Sure.
whoever occupies the White House is nothing more than a figurehead.
That's right.
He's like the front man that goes on TV. But all he does is regurgitate what he's been told to.
Let's take a look back at Lincoln real quick too, because I want to get into the aftermath of the Civil War. I had spoken, I guess, to all the other guests to a certain extent, that Lincoln, obviously, even at that time, they knew what the deal was. If you get elected, you've got to do some shilling for the powers that be. I think what happens is you can tell what presidents changed their mind, had a change of heart, or maybe even try to do something on their own volition because they get killed.
And it got nailed for it.
Okay, now, give me your assessment of Lincoln in these terms. I'm thinking, he's a politician and a shill who might have a change of heart, and we can't have that. That's what I'm throwing out there. What do you think?
Well, I'll just respond by using Lincoln's own words on the matter. He said that, and this comes from the Lincoln Encyclopedia, spoken and written words of Abraham Lincoln by Macmillan Publishers. He said, the money power, that's like the Rothschilds and the Jesuits, preys upon the nation in times of peace and conspires against it in times of adversity. It is more despotic than monarchy, more insolvent than autocracy, more selfish than bureaucracy. I see in the near future a crisis approaching that unnerves me and causes me to tremble for the safety of my country. Corporations have been enthroned. An era of corruption will follow, and the money power of the country will endeavor to prolong its reign by working upon the prejudices of the people until the wealth is aggregated in a few hands and the republic is destroyed. So yeah, Lincoln knew exactly where the problem was coming from, and then went on to say that that if we allow it, we only have ourselves to blame. So it would be like a form of national suicide.
Yeah, and you know, we hear a lot about the story of Lincoln having a portentous dream that he would not live out his second term. I think he thought he'd last, I think, 2 years into it. I don't believe that wasn't true. I don't know if he had that dream or not, and he might very well have, but I got a feeling that when he changed his heart, he had to know that there was, from that time onward, a bullseye on him.
Mm-hmm. Well, he relayed that dream to Charles Chinnicky.
Chinnicky? Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, also, I just want to throw this in here because it's something I think is really rich, and I'm glad that you did this. In the second edition, did you also include that image that you had in the first transformation where there was a headline from a New York daily that stated that Buchanan and his inaugural party had been poisoned? Did that make it into the second edition?
I may have. I quoted it. I know that.
All right. Well,
I didn't change anything from the first edition.
Okay.
I've kind of added, but the imagery, like I may have changed a few things here and there. I know I put in a whole lot more photographs and a lot more newspaper things and whatnot. But the actual transcription of those newspaper articles are still in there.
Okay. No, because I thought that was great, because you can't argue about this being conspiracy theory. I think it was the Telegram at that day that would later merge, and then they both went the way of nickel candy, because I remember those papers at the very end of their run. Mm-hmm. I think it was the New York World Telegraph. I think that was it. And I think, anyway, one of those dailies had those headlines, you know, and so it stated very clearly. Can you imagine in 56? Mm. I mean, can you imagine even now reading that your president and his people were poisoned at their inaugural celebration? Whoa. And that never makes it into the history books, Charles. And I'm glad you have it there, because nobody can say, oh, that didn't happen.
Yeah.
Good for you. All right. So Lincoln knows now, right? That,
he knows. He knows. He saw that the bankers were compromising all of the political leaders of America. They were using their money like to grease the palms of like everyone they could, and that the politicians were selling their country out for, you know, a bowl of pottage, as it were, and tried to stop it.
Right. And this might bring us, I don't know, do you want to say anything about Booth before we go on?
About Booth? No.
Okay, I mean, really, there doesn't need anything to be said, but I would say this, I think as you'll agree, and Epperson was big on this, Booth was known to have been a Knight of the Golden Circle. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I've got the actual oath that they had to take.
And also, the Knights of the Golden Circle were pretty much prepped for what they had to do to instigate, at least in the South, this idea of perhaps of a civil war. But they were more or less briefed in Great Britain and let loose here. Is that correct?
I think so. I never got too much into the inner workings of the Knights of the Golden Circle. I mentioned the fact that, yeah, they existed. I mentioned the fact that, yeah, a lot of the conspirators belonged to it, particularly Booth.
Right.
And they were being funded by the European powers.
That'll do it.
You know.
Okay.
So they had money stashed like everywhere, and they were kind of, you know, running sort of like a guerrilla war
Yes, exactly. Yeah, I've heard it phrased a number of ways. That would be another one of them. That their intent was, and they successfully began paramilitary organizations. The lightest I think you could call it, they call them shooting clubs. The point's clear, and is what you said also, is what I have also come upon. But if we can even move on now, one of the other things that you also include are some of the communications by Romanists, even in the upper Midwest, that kind of belie that there was a desire at that time to perhaps hijack the United States in one way or another and put it into liege, if you will, to the Vatican.
Mm-hmm.
And would that have necessarily been, well, not necessarily militarily, would it have been financial? What is the deal on what the plan was after the fact?
Well, from what I understand, they wanted to kickstart the Civil War all over again. But this time, all of a sudden now you've got like no leadership at the top insofar as the North is concerned, right? So they'd be kind of running around willy-nilly, not knowing what the hell to do. Then you kickstart the Civil War all over again, now that you've gotten rid of these top politicians, and turn it into a religious war of extermination. I had one letter that was written to Abraham Lincoln not too long before his assassination, stating that the Roman churches, the basements anyway, were stockpiled with weaponry to be handed out to their congregations on a given signal, right? Whether it's ringing church bells in the middle of the night or whatever it happened to be, then they would kind of distribute all this weapon and then run around like it was the Bartholomew Massacre all over again and start killing their Protestant neighbors.
On face to a lot of people that'll sound fantastic, not believable, but they don't really understand just how deeply the hatred is definitely exhibited by the Society of Jesus towards those who are not Romanists. As it says, I believe in that oath, that they will extirpate the heretics by any means necessary, and those heretics are anybody who may not be Romanist.
Yeah, well, I mean, their hatred is on par with what you see now every day regarding fanatical Islam.
Right.
It's exactly the same thing.
Yeah, and, it's hard for people to believe that such an entrenched organization that's been around now for that's probably 6 centuries, named the Society of Jesus, and it has a Jesus word in there, that people, and of course this is a brilliant stroke. How could people just not understanding and not going into the subject matter, how would they believe that something called the Society of Jesus would in fact be some of the most preeminent killers that this globe has ever seen?
It is hard until you start to understand and take a look at exactly how they've operated over the centuries. Yeah. Do you have anything? Have you found out in your research, or if it's conjecture, say so? It would be an educated guess, but you'll tell us. How much do you believe, or do you know, Lincoln had a clue about with regard to the Rothschilds and the Jesuit connection? I know that Chinnicky was his confidant for some time. Is that correct? Yeah.
Did he? Of course,
for about a 10-year period, I think.
Oh, all right. I hate to, cut things this tight. For 10 years, Chinnicky and Lincoln were in communication.
Yeah.
Obviously, Lincoln dies in what, 65?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So Chinnicky had possibly had somewhat of his ear, say around the mid-50s?
Right from the time that Lincoln defended Chinnicky in Urbana.
Right.
It was during that particular trial that they became very, very good friends. I mean, Lincoln saw firsthand how the church was using for using the laws of the United States in order to railroad an innocent man. And he came right out and said at his closing address that the power that allowed this to happen, that he would come against it, come hell or high water. That's kind of paraphrasing it a bit. But he knew exactly who was behind all of that. And I think later on he knew exactly who were the the money people.
All right, refresh my memory. Was Chinnicky a Canadian?
Yeah, but he took out U.S. citizenship.
He did, and where did he reside? Was it in Illinois or Wisconsin or?
Just outside of Chicago.
Okay.
He was a priest, but he started up a town called St. Anne, which is a suburb of Chicago. That town of St. Anne, just outside of Chicago, is a town that Charles Chinnicky founded. And when he did that, he brought in tens of thousands of French and Belgian and French Canadian immigrants. So, for all intents and purposes, it was a French enclave situated just outside of Chicago.
All right, and because Chinnicky was a Romanist priest,
right?
When he founded that, was it founded also as somewhat a Romanist enclave spiritually?
It was.
All right, now
but the problem that his bishops and a few of his co-religionists had was the fact that he was also a temperance type person. He was well grounded in the Bible, and his fellow priests were constantly getting drunk and constantly picking up whores and constantly having sex between themselves. And there was an awful lot of that type of thing and corruption beyond scope. And he wanted to put an end to all of that and start preaching the gospel directly from the Bible. So all of that, so they tried to railroad him. They got this one priest who talked to his biological sister and said, "Look, I want you to charge him with rape, and we'll back you all the way. If you have to perjure yourself in court, so be it. I'll give you absolution." And that's what they tried to pull off. Well, the whole plan fell apart when one of the ladies that had overheard that entire conversation came to Lincoln in the middle of the night, and when it looked like that Chinnicky was going to be found guilty, and told Lincoln exactly what happened, how the plan all came together in that, and then Lincoln said, "Oh, great! Well, now we've got them by the short ones," and that was the end of that court case. And then he realized from that point on that Rome is not exactly all
that it's cut out to be.
Yeah.
All right, so Chinnicky was a priest in a Romanist church, and then he came out. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And
shortly after that, I think he became a Presbyterian.
And he recounts those events in the book. 50 Years in the Church of Rome? Is that the name of it?
That's right.
Okay. And actually, folks, you can read that online if you want some deep background on this particular character. So, but that also sheds light on the fact that Lincoln, well before he, and he might have thoughts back then, I don't know, realized what he was up against should he become president. And who knows what he thought when in '56 he realized that Buchanan had his life attempted. It's like he had to know what he was up against, and that he still took it on. I'm not really sure what that was all about. But he certainly went on regardless, and eventually it did get him as well. Buchanan lived, but understood what the deal was. Lincoln was not that fortunate.
Well, and there was a letter that was apparently sent to Abraham Lincoln before Lincoln was actually elected in 1860, and it outlines this whole assassination that took place. I can't remember with what president. The poisoning.
Yeah.
That took place, right? And I have that Lincoln actually there, or I've got that letter posted on my site.
Okay.
As a PDF.
And also that is ctwilcox.com. That's Charles's site, and that's where you can go to look at that. When you talk about the fact that Lincoln understood that there would be a financial attempt to take over the country, which is really the only way you need to do it.
Mm-hmm.
If you take it over financially, and we've seen this already happen, although a lot of people are just completely unaware of it, and I understand that.
Oh, we see it happening right now again.
Yeah. This is heavy-duty stuff, and this, I think, is a very, very arrogant, bold, and massive movement now that pretty much put the stake through our heart in the United States. And and you guys got your situations up there too in Canada.
Mm-hmm.
What I understand now, all of a sudden, your government has realized, how much debt you're in.
Yeah, I'm not too sure what. I mean, I know that Canada's better situated. Yeah, damn morphine. Than a lot of the industrialized countries, because the banks were an awful lot more conservative. But still, there's been pressure to help out the auto industry, and now there's pressure to help out the oil industry, and so we're not nearly as bad off as you guys are.
No.
Right?
Right.
But, all the same, we haven't escaped it at all yet either.
In fact, I got a email from Burke in Toronto. He said that after running a surplus, Canada's about to go $100 billion in debt.
Yeah, that's about right.
All right. Not good. All right. So anyway, obviously that starts to take place. And what's interesting, too, at the time after the Civil War, and actually during, but certainly after, and not long after it, John D. Rockefeller, starts to make his move on an empire that I think would prove to be most disastrous for United States citizens, given the fact that was the beginning of the robber baron wresting of the financial control in the United States and then eventually governmental control, which we're seeing right now. And that's why it's so rich it would go back to banking, where they're going to bring all U.S. citizens down to their knees.
Mm.
And it was right about that time. And, of course, Rockefeller and Morgan partnered with the Rothschilds, and they understood the way things would go, and they would create a pact. And that's why you have your elites on both sides of the Atlantic going for, let's face it, the prize is a one-world government where their generational offspring will rule. And I know that's a lot to chew off, but that's really the end game, though, Charles, and we'll get back to some of the particulars. But really, this is all about one-world government in the end, isn't it?
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, yeah. I think ultimately what they want to do is have whoever's in the White House sign off on a transfer of authorization of who actually runs the country.
Right.
Under a greater type government, like probably through the United Nations.
And going back to the last days of Lincoln's life, and then what would take place with Johnson, and the tool, or how much of a tool that Johnson was. It seemed that the radical Republicans behind Lincoln were willing to throw him to the dogs, and I think that they were more than willing, and they were not necessarily bereaved by the fact that Lincoln was assassinated. But, because they had designs also that were not the most meritorious for we the people.
Oh, yeah. I mean, they were about as bereaved as Johnson was in the airplane right after JFK.
Well, and there's another personage here that emerges, and maybe you could discuss that, because this has not heretofore been discussed in the interviews we've done, and maybe it'll have been alluded to. But what about the personage of Thaddeus Stevens? How does he play into this?
Thaddeus Stevens, yeah, what can I say? He wanted to change. He picked up like ideas of Karl Marx and whatnot, and it was, from what I understand, through his instigation that the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments came into being.
Right.
And what those three amendments did, essentially, is completely it erased the original U.S. Constitution and created a brand new one. The original Constitution was you are a citizen of the United States by reason of being a citizen of any particular state.
Right.
Yeah, well, that comes to completely reverse. So you're now a citizen of a federal autocracy,
right,
more or less.
Agreed.
And so that what they did is concentrate power in Washington, and then allowed the states to pass their little individual laws, but the individual states were always to be subservient,
sure,
to that. So what you've done essentially is to create a more European type system of government,
right?
Which then can be altered, controlled, or whatever. So almost to the point where now you've got this whole executive order stuff is essentially dictatorship.
It is, and people can go to. Oh boy, Harry and I. You remember Harry, right?
Mm-hmm.
Harry, don't be too enthusiastic about that. Harry and I did a show once back in the bad old days, because you can go in on a website, I forget what it is, just do a search, and you can find the history of executive orders being written by presidents. And they actually do start with Lincoln, for obvious reasons.
Mm-hmm.
And, of course, you'll never see more written. Well, maybe I shouldn't say that. But, I mean, those that were written underneath Hoover and Roosevelt and Truman are, like, off the wall. But you're right. The exercise of the executive order, for the most part, it gives you a dictatorship. Let's just call it what it is.
Yeah.
And, I mean, it's almost impossible to try to override it. So for the most part, they never are. And why in the world would you allow something like that if you wanted a truly constitutional republic, whatever that means? That would, like you said, Charles, that would be something that would not even have the color of a monarchical form of government. And, of course, like you said, and that's key, the executive order turns, I think, whatever people think is American into European and monarchical.
Yeah, very autocratic.
Without a doubt.
And it's been going exponentially ever since Ronald Reagan. I think Ronald Reagan went completely haywire in the number of executive orders, and it's just gotten even worse and worse and worse.
Well,
and now you've got Barack Obama. He's not even president, and he's already trying to issue executive orders, while Bush is still sitting. I'm like, come on.
Well, the thing is, first of all, Ronnie was haywire before he was president, and they shot his ass, and he didn't die. Which obviously, this is what happens when you use cheap assassins. But he understood what the deal was, so he was a tool during that time. But again, that fits in that whole continuum. And obviously, after Carter, you had Reagan roll up a whole bunch, or I should say, a whole bunch were rolled up while he was president. And when actually George Bush was doing the deed. And then you have Bush. But, I mean, if you go to that website and you take a look at the executive orders that have been written, I mean, it is really breathtaking because nobody has any idea how they come out. I mean, we're talking about they're into the tens of thousands now. If only just from the time, especially of Hoover. But they did have their inception with Lincoln, which a lot of people castigate him for. But, again, it was a tough time. It was...
Well, I mean, executive orders, I suppose, have their place, right?
Right.
If used very, very judiciously and very, very sparingly, right? But to come out almost every, 24 hours with a brand new executive order, then you've got, runaway autocracy.
Sure. And, the Informer has been on the show, and he's pointed to the fact that emergency powers have always been... Well, they've been with us for a long time, going even back to Washington, and they've had some strengthening. One of the times was obviously during the Civil War. And, of course, if you can always keep the United States in a sense of emergency, which he makes a good case for, and people can check out for themselves, is most definitely the case, well, then EO always has its place, doesn't it? And that's what I think we're seeing to this very day. You may not agree necessarily with that construct, but you would have to agree that they do write them like they were like swallowing M&Ms.
Yeah. Now, and they always claim that they're doing it for the benefit of the people.
Well, it's like the old Kool-Aid and Luke. We're doing it for your own good, Luke.
Yeah.
Why don't you stop being so good to me? Now, in the few minutes that we have left also, there's still reverberations through this whole thing. I mean, with the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, and also the fact that after the several states of the Confederacy were allowed back in as peaceable states, the federal government wasn't sure that they would go for the ratification of the 13th, 14th, and 15th, so they threw them back under martial law again, which is something that a lot of people, again, if you just stick to the vanilla history books, don't know that much about. So here we get, and I'm saying here because I'm now in Florida.
They were never ratified.
Really?
As far as I know.
Well, I would say if they were, it was by the point of the bayonet.
Well, yeah, okay, ratified under duress.
Yes, without a doubt. That was the whole idea. And that was even, I tell you what, Southerners down here, and I had said this to one of our other guests, are more put off by that period where they were put under martial law again for the Reconstruction Acts and such than they were about the whole war. That sticks with them, and that says volumes, I think, about exactly what the damage was done. But now, I mean, what do you think in the last couple of minutes we have, Charles? When you look at the Civil War, when you look at the financial element, it's economics, you're right. It's always about the money. Today, as we're looking at the Fed and such, is the Fed something that also you believe was an offshoot of what took place in the Civil War?
Yeah, I think so. Well, I mean, think about it. The Fed is nothing more than a branch office of the Bank of England.
Yep.
Right. The Bank of England is owned by the Rothschilds, among others. Right.
Right.
So they've got and you've got your branch office, the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, essentially, and that's a Rockefeller and whoever else. Right. So and you take. If you, I can't remember who it was, Cicero or somebody said, if you take control of the money of a nation, then you've got the nation.
Well, let me go back to Cicero. What everybody remembers is pretty much one of the Rothschilds making the same crack. If you control the money supply, who do you care? Sits in D.C. or in London or wherever. And it's true. I mean, it's always been about the money. It's always been about economics. It's more about market building than nation building. It's all about mercantilism, and so we find the same thing in the Civil War. But in some though too, would you say that the Civil War, perhaps in what you might call the more modern era, whatever, at least within the scope of the length of this country's history, do you think that? Well, you tell me. Was irreparable damage done to this country at that time?
Irreparable?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, look what you have now.
Yeah, I am. You want to be more specific, or?
Irreparable. Well, yeah. I mean, because you wound up. Basically, you wound up with the money people in more or less in control.
Right.
They're the ones that are dictating the laws of the land. The whole thing is money and power, man. So essentially, it's the Wall Street brokers that are now running the country. Right? They grease the hands of the politicians. The politicians bow down and kiss whoever asks that they're told to kiss. And
well,
I don't know. What can I say?
No, well, I mean, we're in agreement, so it's something that I can't give you an argument about, which sometimes.
I mean, to explain the whole thing takes a book, right? And that's kind of why I wrote it.
And no doubt, and that book is Transformation of the Republic. The website for Charles is ctwilcox.com. Those links will be up, obviously, with the audio when we do put up however many interviews that we do have, or I will conduct, probably under the heading of the war between us states. And I think that says volumes. But again, yeah, it's all about the money. There's no two ways about it. And like you said also, Charles, the Civil War now expands the central government even more. We see it again happen in the 30s. We're going to see it happen again now. But when the Fed popped up, right around that would be, I guess, 1913.
Yeah.
That was the all-time central private bank that nobody ever wanted. Supposedly, at least the original.
That was
patrons.
like about the third or fourth attempt at a central bank in the United States, and every president that had turned down the idea of a central bank was eventually taken out of the picture.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, you take a look. I mean, Lincoln obviously had there was a financial issue with him too, with greenbacks. Garfield also, McKinley with the bimetalist situation, and those are still topics that are worthy of going deep into.
JFK.
Yeah, they're there too.
You know, I mean, he came out and said that the Fed has got to go, and he knew who was screwing the country around.
Well,
so he tried to come up with silver certificates and whatnot, and get rid of the whole concept of the Federal Reserve System. And it didn't take long for them, to arrange their hitmen.
But Charles, do you still have this up on your site? The text of the speech that he made, I guess that was in April of '61?
To the National Press Club.
You got it.
Yeah, I do have that. Yeah, and he talks about secret societies or whatever, but the MO that he is describing can only belong to one group on this planet. And he's speaking specifically of the Jesuit order.
I would agree. It would fit the bill. Some people have said, well, could it be the bankers? And in a way, yeah, there's an overlay there, and that's part of the whole deal. But certainly he's not talking about a country. He would have named Russia at that time if that was the problem, because we were obviously in a pitched Cold War with them. He left the perp without name or title, or, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
He left it vague, but certainly you cannot look under the definition that he laid out in that speech and affix it to any particular country. It was something else out there, and I would agree with you. Now, you have that also on your site, is that correct?
Yeah, it's posted there.
All right. Listen, we've been talking with Charles Wilcox. He is the author of Transformation of the Republic. You have a second edition out. Is there something forthcoming, or?
No, I think that's it right now insofar as books are concerned. I do, or I am in contact with a film producer right now, and
good.
he's displayed some strong interest in getting this translated into a film project of one kind or another. I should know more within the next couple of months. When he's serious and makes a serious offer, then I'll certainly let you know.
All right. Not that this is a real big deal, but I'm just curious. Is this a Canadian concern or United States?
No, some guy in California.
All right. That's great.
So, I mean, the whole idea is to get this eventually as a history, like a real history, to eventually be viewed from your living room, eating your Swanson TV dinners, and then immediately hucking it up once you realize the truth.
Oh, that's a nice visual. All right. Well, listen. We've talked about this before, and honestly, that would be a great thing. But the powers that are against you, I just hope it happens. I hope it happens.
I hope so, too. Well, you know what? I mean, there have been an awful lot of movies. I mean, the most recent one that I can think of is Elizabeth, the Golden Age. I don't know if you saw that movie or not. It just came out a few years ago. That whole movie is nothing but Jesuit conspiracy against Queen Elizabeth I. So movies are still being made. Right? It's just, I don't know what the deal is with the United States, but, it's going to happen. If I have to put a gun to somebody's head, it's going to happen.
I'll be looking forward to that moment. Charles T. Wilcox, author of Transformation of the Republic, and we'll talk to you soon again, Charles.
Okay.
Good night now.